It's like a Dr. Phil moment there at the end.
Exactly.
And you could take that to the bank.
Some things can never be unseen.
Welcome to the Archispeak Podcast, the podcast for architects by architects, where we discuss all things about architecture. I'm Neil Pan. Each episode, Evan Troxel, Cormac Phelan, and me invite you in on the conversation as we talk about everything in the profession, both the good and the bad. Maybe you're considering a career in architecture, you're still in school, or you've been around the block more times than you'd like to admit. Join us in the studio as we gather around the water cooler and talk about this profession we call architecture. It's time for some Archispeak. Welcome to episode 31 of the Archispeak Podcast. I'm Neil Pan.
I'm Evan Troxel.
And I'm Cormac Phelan.
And Evan, I believe we have a friend of the show to announce for this week.
That's right. This week we have John Harvey, who donated $10 to the show. And John is practicing in North Carolina doing healthcare. So we appreciate it. Thanks, John, for becoming a new friend of the show this week. And if anybody else wants to become a friend of the show and get your name read on the podcast, you can do that at archispeakpodcast.com/donate. And we would love to read your name on the show. So thanks, John.
So Cormac, this week you had an interesting project you were working on. We thought we'd make it a part of the show. So why don't you give us a little update on what that project is?
Okay. Well, as I hope all of you guys know, Architecture Week is coming up soon, and I was asked if I would be interested. And I'll butcher the name of this presentation style, but I was asked to if I'd be interested in doing a Pechacucha presentation. I've heard it pronounced all sorts of different ways.
Pechacucha?
I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah. What?
That one. And for those of you who
I had to go look that up. I had to go look it up.
It's where you do a presentation with 20 slides, and it's 20 seconds per slide. And, I was joking with the guy who had asked me, and, I was like, I got a great idea. I can do it on zombies, and he's like, yeah, remember that it's Architecture Week, kind of prompting me to not do it on zombies, I guess. Which, I sort of was in jest. I was actually more referring to, possibly doing like maybe sketches or something like that. But, I honestly, he'd asked, and that was the first thought that came out of my mind. But when I started to think about it a little bit more and, kind of even talk with you guys, there's always been something that's interested me. And so I was like, okay, I may not do it on zombies, but let's do it on death. And specifically, the death of architects.
Interesting deaths of architects, right?
The interesting deaths of architects. I mean, whether we like to believe it or not, we all might, find our way to the end of time and die.
It's the one,
and some of us sooner than others in very interesting ways, apparently.
We all have it in common.
And so I started making a list of, stories I heard, that professors told me, and then, things that I, through reading, I was like, for some reason, I sometimes get fixated on how people kind of went. And, so I kind of have a list, and it may not be the 20 that I need for the presentation. I think, and we were all talking about this, kind of through texting and everything else, that maybe what I'll do, because these are actually pretty interesting, and what it means is I'll have 40 seconds to kind of tell the story of each of these architects' death by showing a photograph of who they are and how they died. So it would basically be 2 slides per architect. And,
so some might get more time than others, right?
Some might get more time than others. And actually, the more I start doing research on these, the more I find interesting tales and side stories and things like that of each one of them. I mean, I kind of started off with, okay, this how this guy died, this how this guy died, this how this guy died. And they're all interesting. But then when you start doing a little bit more research, looking at more than just the Wikipedia page and things like that, you actually find more things about it. And I'll probably, there's one that's like really interesting story. I mean, it's like tabloid, amazing type story. And I guess let's start the show off with him.
All right.
Take it away.
All right. Stanford White. Do we know who Stanford White is?
Yes.
I didn't.
You do.
I did not. You do. Tell us more, Cormac.
Okay. Well, Stanford White, famed New York architect of McKee, McKim, Mead, and White.
Okay.
Let me get the name of the firm right.
Yeah.
Did,
anyone ever heard of them?
Yeah. Hopefully everybody's heard of them, but, this is an architect who designed the Madison Square Garden, the original Madison Square Garden. And just reading it on the surface, okay, architect who designed Madison Square Garden was shot on the rooftop garden of Madison Square Garden. Now that sounds really interesting.
Yeah,
but,
really.
It's just like, well, that kind of sucks. I mean, architect, your architecture will kill you your architecture will kill you somehow.
Yeah, really.
But then when I started to go through, okay, so what's the story behind why he got shot, in the rooftop garden of Madison Square Garden? Well, come to find out, old Stanford White, he was an interesting fellow. He was a womanizer, socialite. I mean, he was one of, at that time, I'd probably say that he was probably more famous. Well, at that time, he was actually more famous than Frank Lloyd Wright was. I mean, everybody knew him. He was, always in the social circles. I mean, you couldn't think of American architecture without thinking of Stanford White. And, back then, this guy rolled with, the Vanderbilts and everybody else. So, I mean, he was.
Do you think that's how he put it?
Probably not. Yeah. That's how I roll. Curling his mustache up.
That's right.
Yeah, and he's got an epic mustache.
Yeah, if people don't know, I always like to see what these people look like, what they looked like in their time, and yeah, go look at his, he's got quite the mustache.
Yeah, he does.
Now it's not the, cool handlebar mustache, but it's
kind of a windblown handlebar.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's nothing classifying it in the Wikipedia article.
No, it's just massive.
But
anyway,
so you dig more into it and you're like, okay, well, who shot the guy? The guy's name was, Harry Thaw. And who Harry Thaw was he was the heir to Pittsburgh coal and railroad fortune. So he was a millionaire. And this is a guy who, he was a socialite in his own right, but, he was partier, drinker, druggie, he was, he was epitomized the playboy lifestyle, living off of the parents' money and all that other stuff. But he was very obsessive about things, and come to find out later on, he was extremely mentally unstable. I mean, the guy was, for lack of a better term, a whack job. And so he was he was trying to establish his position in the social circles. So he was trying to join all of these elite clubs. Well, these are the same elite clubs that Stanford White belonged to. And for some reason, he was never getting into any of these. Fact of the matter is that they basically deemed that his behavior was unbecoming of a gentleman. So that's why he never got in. But for some reason, he believed that Stanford White was plotting against him. Now, he sort of knew Stanford White, but really didn't know him. And so he became very obsessive over Stanford White, trying to ruin his social career. Fast forward in time, Stanford White, being the, kind of playboy womanizer that he was, started to, hang out with, and basically he took on a lover, which just happened to be Henry Thaw's wife.
Whoops.
16-year-old wife, which kind of creeped me out when you started to think about it. Here's a 47-year-old guy courting a 16-year-old girl. Wow. And I mean, that right there alone was like, wow. I mean,
this is like tabloid stuff.
It is.
It is.
It's stuff that nowadays you get creeped out about anyway. And then you listen to this and it's like, wow,
but hey, Evan, to go off the tabloid stuff, it says here that the newspapers of William Randolph Hearst played up the murder, and it became known as "quote unquote" the trial of the century.
Yes.
So there it is. I mean, this was a huge deal.
Jeez.
And
polar vortex headlines right here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So basically, they were attending dinner and a show at the rooftop theater in the garden of Madison Square Garden. And actually, it's kind of interesting because, and I've got to find it, but basically at the end they were playing the very last song, and it was kind of funny. You could have any girl in a million or something like that.
I could love a million girls.
That's it. Well, guess what? The one girl that you did love is about to get you killed.
Yeah, really.
And so, he's kind of stood up and, within 2 feet of him, shot him 3 times in the head. I won't go through the gruesome, newspaper. If you read the newspaper article, and we'll have a link in the show notes, but if you read they so sensationalized it that they explained, what he looked like after he was shot, and, point blank range in the head and all this other stuff. It's pretty gruesome stuff, but,
nice.
It says the initial reaction of the crowd was one of good cheer, as elaborate party tricks among the upper echelon of New York society were common at the time. However, when it became apparent that White was dead, hysteria ensued.
Oh, God.
Wow.
You gotta love the writing of the time. It's awesome.
Man.
But I mean, so, I guess, it's kind of ironic that, here one of his most famous buildings also serves as the setting for his death. So it's, it's not quite the, architecture has killed you, but architecture's at least set the stage,
it's your final resting place.
Yeah.
Did you see at the bottom, though, that apparently White was seriously ill at the time of his murder? The autopsy revealed. And it says that, in fact, he would have succumbed shortly to any of the diseases he suffered from, which was Bright's disease, tuberculosis, and severe liver deterioration.
Wow.
So this man was at the end of his life no matter what.
Oh, yeah. There's plenty of stories of, and I didn't include a lot of them in my list, but there are lots of stories of architects dying from alcohol poisoning, mostly because they, drank themselves to death. which,
See, so for the students you're listening to this is what you have to look forward to.
yeah. There's
well, this guy was an interesting character. He's a good one to start with.
I was thinking, hey, let's go in kind of chronicle. I'm still trying to figure out how to set up the presentation, and do I do it by chronological order? Or do I do it where, here's just some interesting deaths, and here's ones that, no, architecture really did kill them, so just trying to figure out, exactly how to frame all of these. And maybe, we talk about it a little bit later after we kind of go through this list of interesting characters. But, it's just, you can see how I'm going to have trouble trying to, tell that story in 40 seconds because, I can just say Stanford White, designer of Madison Square Garden, was shot, at the top of Madison Square Garden. I mean, that's kind of boring.
And the onlookers cheered.
Yeah, and the onlookers cheered, and they thought it was a prank.
That's right.
That's some pretty good special effects.
As Stanford White gets up with big hole in head, people realize, nope, he's really dead.
I think our audience could help you write this presentation, actually.
They probably could, and
because basically these are like Twitter post length slide descriptions.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Perfect.
I mean, it really is kind of a, it's 20 seconds doesn't seem like a long time. And, I kind of, it's basically in 20 slides, it's like 6 minutes. So it's kind of quick for, all of this stuff. And, we've been talking about Stanford White for, several minutes now, at least 10.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, you got to, it's a headline and like a quick synopsis, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to help crowdsource your presentation here.
All right.
By the Archispeak crew. Yeah.
That's right.
So has anybody here been to Madison Square Garden? I haven't.
I've seen the newer one. Now understand there's a new one now. It's the round one that when you come out of Penn Station, you see the newer one. The old one's gone. So you don't really
I heard that foreshadowing right there.
And who designed Penn Station?
Who designed it? I don't know. I don't know who designed it. I just know who died there. That's all.
Yes, that's true. Should we go straight to him then?
No. Keep people hanging here.
Okay.
Dun, dun, dun.
Well, since we're in New York, let's talk about, he's not quite an architect, but,
not quite.
I still consider his work, I still consider a lot of his work a work of architecture. I mean, these are iconic things that a lot of different cities, but this particular one, uses as part of its architectural identity. And so let's move on to the Brooklyn Bridge.
All right. Designed
by John Augustus Roebling. And, so here's a bridge builder, an engineer. And, I think in his own right, should we call him a design engineer, an architectural engineer? I mean, we got to say that's a piece of architecture, don't you think?
The lines were blurred more in the middle 1800s, so
yeah, So
I let's give him credit. He is the architect of the bridge.
Well, so here, so here's a guy who, literally did give his blood, sweat, tears, and ultimately his life for his work. John Roebling was on his way. He was overseeing the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, and basically slipped between. His foot slipped between the ferry and the bridge, and the wherever the boats are tied up to, the docks. Wow, is it really that late for me?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
So anyway, he got his leg crushed between the docks and the ferry, and contracted, tetanus, and got a huge infection, and died from a tetanus infection.
I remember hearing the story about how he was basically locked in his apartment, right, while he oversaw construction.
So this is so this is where the story kind of keeps going a little bit further.
Okay.
That was actually Washington Roebling.
Oh, okay.
His son, who took over from his dad when his dad died.
Jeez.
So John Augustus Roebling, he had a huge bridge business where he was designing bridges all over the country. Brought his son on, and when his dad died, the son took over the completion of the Brooklyn Bridge. But, here, this is the first time that, these guys are really using this depth of, caisson drilling and all that other stuff, which in that time is getting into, going down into the caissons. And
jeez.
So he contracted caissons disease.
Is that really what it's called?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like scuba diving and coming up too fast.
Basically,
decompression,
it's
kind of a
sort of like the bands,
right?
But in an extremely severe case, and so he basically oversaw the completion of the Brooklyn Bridge, from an apartment building overlooking the construction site of the Brooklyn Bridge. Wow.
Yeah, I remember he's looking through a telescope, right?
Yeah, I don't know if any of you've ever seen. It's an exceptional show. It's only an hour long too, but it's the Ken Burns documentary on the Brooklyn Bridge, and it talks about John and Washington Roebling. And it's really, really interesting story. I actually bought it on iTunes because I really enjoyed it a lot. So, and I've watched it over and over again. So, but here's a project that was bound and determined to kill somebody.
Yeah,
all joking aside, it did. It took, plenty of people's lives, during the construction of it. But,
yeah, right.
Here's these, two famed designers, and, kills the dad, almost kills the son. Surprisingly enough, he lived a long life. I think he was like 86, Washington Roebling. I think he was 86 when he finally died, but, he basically lived in pain from caisson's disease, from the time he contracted it to the time of his death.
Nice.
So, yeah.
So the actual designer, he died from tetanus.
Yeah, he died from a tetanus infection from, having his foot crushed.
Jeez. Horrible.
On his way to, from the construction site.
Wow. Crazy. Wear your steel toe shoes, people.
Yeah. That's, I'm pretty sure that, OSHA would have gigged them for, not wearing proper gear. But, a gentleman doesn't wear a hard hat.
Jeez. All right. Who's next? Who's next to go?
Who is next? Who is next to go? How about, okay, we go from,
Cormac's hit list here.
How about we go from, guys,
someone. This is another person who you probably might consider an architect, right?
No, if we're talking about the same guy, I'm going to skip him for now.
Okay.
I'm going to save the big names till last. But this is another guy who, basically died on the job. And I'm not talking about the old adage of, architects don't retire, they die at their desk. Not that one, but so George Kemp, he was the architect of Edinburgh's Scots Museum. So here's a guy who he travels to the office of his building contractor. And, this is Scotland. It's wet, it's misty, it's foggy, it's rainy, it's everything, probably all in 5 seconds. So as he's leaving his contractor's office, he's walking home, kind of gets lost in the heavy fog, ends up falling into a canal and drowning.
Jeez.
I mean,
lonely.
It kind
lonely
of,
death.
you just, it's almost that, damn it, if you almost want to say, just hang out at your contractor's office a little while longer, have a beer, have a scotch or whatever, just wait for it to go, but this guy, and he died relatively young, and, but, it just kind of sucks. You're on your way home and whoop.
Jeez. Not a good sound.
Not a good sound.
No.
Oh, I'm a horrible person. Now, speaking of, I actually like this, that I'm going to kind of go right on into what we were just discussing, and we'll stay with the water theme.
Never mind the death theme.
Never mind the death theme, but here's the water theme. Our favorite architect, who, Evan, is not an architect.
Yeah, right.
Old Corbu. Now, we shared a couple of images before the show, and one of them will haunt us all till our deaths.
And everybody that looks at the show notes.
I think that's got to go. Yeah. And everybody needs to sign up for the show notes to have them delivered to their email address.
Yes.
So that this is the first thing you see as you're listening.
And I honestly
think the show.
I honestly think that, as, someone in this profession, you have to see that image.
Heck yeah.
I don't know if it's a rite of passage or just it's a must.
Yeah, I agree.
So we're going to go with Corb. Now, you got to imagine that Corb was probably a difficult person to deal with. I mean, most architects of that stature probably all are. And you honestly can't tell them what to do. Even their doctors.
That's right.
And so against his doctor's orders, Corb loved to swim. And, here's an old man. He's age 77. And his doctor tells him, you need to calm down. You need to slow down. You're getting up there in age, and you need to just kind of don't go swimming. Guess who goes swimming?
Heck yeah.
Guess who doesn't come back from swimming? Am I explaining these the wrong way? I mean, should I? I almost sound kind of horrible when I'm saying it's just like, but so here's a guy who basically, he went out swimming. He died of a heart attack while swimming. I mean, he at least enjoyed what he was doing, and did what he was doing to the very end.
It doesn't seem quite as sad. Yeah.
His doesn't seem quite as sad. And
it was a huge loss. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying, like, yeah, you're right. He was probably doing what he wanted to be doing.
Yeah. Well, and you say it was a huge loss, and, it was kind of interesting because if, you look at the notes that I sent off to you guys, I mean, it was a huge loss. I mean, people from around the world had stopped to basically pay tribute to Corb.
Yeah.
I mean, my favorite painter, Dali, sent tributes. President Johnson, I mean, here's the quote from President Johnson, said, his influence was universal and his works are invested with permanent quality, possessed by those of very few artists in our history.
Yeah.
I mean, the Soviet Union, here's this time in the height of the Cold War, and even the Soviet Union, the premier of the Soviet Union stopped to say, modern architecture lost its greatest master. It went on and on. You can find quote after quote of people paying homage to, the passing of Corp. It shook the world.
Yeah.
And I don't, and there's famous architects that have, come and gone. And even, in the case of Frank Lloyd Wright, which really, I didn't actually put him on the list. But,
didn't make your list, yeah.
Well, he was 91 years old. He died basically of complications from an intestinal blockage. He had surgery and he died from complications. And you think, that's horrible. And it is horrible. But, he was 91 years old, and that's a long, fruitful life. Here's a man who had several kind of like renaissance of his style and everything else.
But his death is nowhere near as interesting as dying from tetanus from, overseeing construction on a project, or getting your head blown off by, the husband of the wife, your underage wife that you're sleeping with. Come on.
It's not as scandalous.
It's not as scandalous, not as interesting. That's why it doesn't make the list.
No. Now, there are some interesting things in, Frank Lloyd Wright's past that, family members being killed by servants and things like that, like disgruntled servants. And if you guys have ever seen, another Ken Burns film on Frank Lloyd Wright, it's pretty interesting stuff in his past. But no, here's a guy who really did live a full life. And, and to be quite honest with you, even, Corbu did. And, but, I was kind of thinking that I don't think anybody in the architectural world will probably have as much fanfare on their passing, and not, fanfare is not a good word. You won't have the world paying homage to you like they did with Corp. We're talking people stopped what they were doing, pause of the Cold War just to say, how great of a guy this, how great of a man and how great of a designer and architect this guy was.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But you got to see the photo.
But yeah, go see the photo. It is not of his death, just as an FYI for those who might be skittish now that we've played all of this up.
Archispeakpodcast.com/episodes/31 is where you can go to see the show notes, by the way. Check it out.
Now,
so who's next on the list?
Well, I was told a story when I was in architecture school, and come to find out that some of the story was right and some of it was incorrect. Now, this was about Antonio Gaudí, and love the guy's work. This guy could make bricks sing. If you guys have ever seen the way that he can just basically cantilever brick to a way that, this is almost a Gary-esque type manipulation of the structure before you even had
the wrong kind of structure. Yeah.
Before you ever even had, like supporting steel or anything else. So, he was above and beyond, anything that we're doing now. Sure, we've got, all these, twisted steel and undulating, metal, facades and things like that. But the steel's designed to do that. And you'd think because steel's pliable and malleable that, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Now, this is a guy who did some, crazy stuff and on a material that you just never thought he could, you should do.
Yeah.
But so I was told that, he was killed by a streetcar, which he was. But I was told, I guess it was always told that, architecture's going to kill you one of these days. And that's why, and this story is actually what kind of started my whole fascination on the strange deaths of architects. And, Gaudí, I was told, story-wise, that, he was trying to get a better view of Sagrada Familia. And, there's still some speculation that this is sort of true, but he was trying to, get a better view of Sagrada Familia, and he stepped off the curb and got run over by a streetcar. Not quite the case if you actually look at, if you do a little bit of research on how he actually died. He did step off off the curb and get run over by a streetcar. But it was kind of his daily ritual that he would go to church every day, but he would take a walk, and he wasn't really paying attention at this particular time and stepped off the curb, and, there was a streetcar. But it was just part of his daily ritual, and it wasn't that he, was just trying to get that, majestic view of Sagrada Familia as it's going up, and, getting that great view, and boom, gets taken out by, just getting taken out by his building.
Yeah, but he wasn't quite taken out by the streetcar, though.
So, here's a guy.
It gets more interesting now.
Yeah, so here's the interesting part of the story is, so he goes to the hospital. Now, No. You're jumping ahead there a little bit. Okay, well.
You forget, he was assumed to be a beggar because he had no identity and was dressed kind of shabbily. So he was left there unconscious for a while, and eventually a police officer transported him in a taxi to the hospital, where then he received rudimentary care. So it's not like they just picked him up right away, or at least that's not the way it sounds.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, who's this bum? Yeah, let's get him to the hospital eventually. No rush.
And then when they realize that, who it really was, they're like, too late.
The following day, by the way.
Yeah, which is,
The chaplain of the Sagrada Familia recognized him on the following day, but by then Gaudí's condition had deteriorated too severely to benefit from additional treatment. And then died died at 73 and buried 2 days later.
Jeez.
And so when I...
How tragic.
And so when I sent that over to, I guess you guys, about a week ago when I was, typing this up, I said the moral of the story there is, if you're out at a job site, carry ID and don't dress like a bum.
Yeah, exactly.
Because then you'll receive treatment.
Yeah, really.
Which leads us to another person who should have been carrying ID.
Take it away.
Because very much like Gaudí, Louis Kahn.
Circling back to our Penn Station reference.
Circling back to our Penn Station in New York City. Here's a guy who, they believe the cause of death was a heart attack in the men's stall in the men's restroom at Penn Station. But they really didn't, they just kind of treated him. They didn't really treat him. He had no ID. What was kind of interesting is actually he had ID, but he crossed his name out. Now, no one really actually knows why he crossed his name out. There's, kind of speculations about the, two families that he had and all that other stuff. But there's no real rhyme or reason behind why he crossed it out. But he basically was a John Doe, and, they knew he was missing, but they didn't really know he was dead. And it really took, a couple of days for his wife in the office and everybody else to be notified that Louis Kahn died. in a men's bathroom in Penn Station because nobody knew it was Louis Kahn.
Wow.
What a horrible time to have a heart attack, huh?
Yeah.
Swimming and sitting on the can in the men's restroom.
Yeah. Or
If you and I think they went over this in the documentary on him, didn't they? On My Architect.
yeah.
Yeah, they did.
It was very impactful, the way that they wrapped that movie up. So much so that when I went back to New York and Philadelphia last year, and I went to Penn Station, and I went to Kahn's office when I was in Philadelphia too, and just to kind of have a personal memorial of just remembering him, because that movie had such an impact watching it. His work has had such an impact.
Oh, yeah.
Visiting the Salk Institute, and I mean, a lot of these architects that you're naming off here, it's all kind of epic architecture, right? It's I've been across to Brooklyn Bridge, and I've been to Sagrada Familia, and places like in the Salk Institute, and going to Kahn's office, and just it made it kind of personal, right? And now to hear these things kind of ties it all together. It's a really interesting. The study of the lives of these architects and their deaths is pretty interesting stuff to nerds like us, I guess.
You didn't actually use the restroom
No.
in Penn Station, did you?
No, I just got off there.
Okay.
I was going to say something, or at least ask. And, no.
It's all right. I took care of it for you.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
All right. So who's next?
Who is next? Well,
We're down to the last, what,
You got a couple.
2? You got 2 more.
do I have 2 more?
Who do you want to go next? Yeah.
We've talked
Yeah, you
about
got 2 more.
Stanford White. We talked about Oh, here's just one that's it's both sad, but it's interesting the way that he was memorialized, and that was Carlos Scarpa. Now, he died. He died on site. He fell down a flight of concrete stairs. That just sucks.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, but wait. It gets better. He survived for 10 days in a hospital
Yeah.
before succumbing to the injuries of his fall.
yeah. So, he, when he eventually passed away, this is the interesting part. I mean, as much as it,
Oh, that alone's not interesting?
well, I mean,
Interesting.
Here's the-
this part coming up.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The part coming up. Yes.
let's go with
Interestinger.
that, is
Okay.
that he is buried in, the Brion Vega Cemetery. He is buried standing up. He's wrapped in linen sheets in the style of a medieval knight. It's
In an isolated exterior corner of that cemetery.
Yeah. But I mean,
How fascinating.
I think his, and if you ever look at his work and study him, I was always fascinated by his drawing style, the way that he would layer drawings on top of drawings on top of drawings. And it would create, the plan and the elevations and the sections and everything would just be layered on top of each other. And it would be a work of art in its own right. So I was always, fascinated with Scarpa, and his connection with history was always so, so apparent in practically every bit of his work. And so for him to basically be buried as the way the old, the old medieval knights, I mean, I think it's kind of cool in a way.
Yeah.
The cynical side of me says, well, he thought awfully highly of himself. But you know what? I mean, he was pretty amazing. I mean, I really like Carlos Scarpa. He was just one of my favorites. I mean, I just liked, the simplicity of everything. He never really had to overdo it, but for it to still have his work to have a lot of depth and stuff. I mean, sure, not everything was a winner, but I mean, there's just some amazing things. And for my particular thesis, I studied a lot of Scarpa, more, Brion Vega, his cemetery, as part of my, one of my case studies. And, it was just the amazing, connection to history that he had when designing that particular project was just, amazing. Every little move and every little thing actually means something more than just, here's a corner, here's a corner, it's here's a corner, but here's why this corner is exactly why this corner is, and things like that. So it's, it's just, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Sucks though to have to die falling down stairs on your own project. Were the handrails not installed yet, or what happened?
He was a modernist. There was no handrails.
No,
do that.
That was in Japan, by the way.
It was in Japan. It's true. And
all right,
okay, and so
all right. So who's bringing up the rear on our death list tonight?
Who's bringing up the rear? Now this is probably my favorite architect. I think the very first time I took a trip to Chicago, he was some of the first work that I saw. And being an artist, I like the details of things. I like the little things. I like just kind of like the intricacies. And, who better kind of epitomizes, that kind of Chicago turn of the century, art, I guess you kind of call it Art Nouveau, just this attention to detail beyond like your standard adornment. And that's old Louis Henry Sullivan. Now his death.
Apparently you make a lot of money doing what he did too.
Well, maybe you don't. Because
keep going. I'm setting it up for you.
Well, here's a guy who his actual death, I guess just the years leading up to it is why I included him on this list. And it's not necessarily the way he died. It's how he died and how his life was when he died. Now, he's kind of known as the Dean of American Architects, and, is the impact on the architects of the day and, Frank Lloyd Wright, we know that Wright worked for him, Adler was, influenced by him. All of the Chicago, whether they like to admit it or not, they were all influenced by the work of Louis Sullivan. And even, the New York architects who kind of looked down at the Chicago architects, they were all influenced by Sullivan. So, I always had this. I love the guy's work. They have pieces of his, some of the cast iron work from some of his buildings that were subsequently demolished. Hanging up in the art museum. That's, that's how good some of his work is. But so, here's a guy who, kind of went through, he kind of epitomized what the struggles of the architects have been doing recently. So, you can kind of connect with him, maybe not, the resorting to drinking, but architecture's hard and the business is hard. And sometimes, you got good times, sometimes you got bad times. And unfortunately, he kind of went out on a bad time because he basically died in debt. He died, almost impoverished.
Oh, no. He had $189 in his bank account when he died.
It was actually donated to him by, it was donated by the what was that all the
American and Northwestern terracotta companies
paid
his bills and loaned his money and often bought his meals.
Yeah, I mean, so here's a guy who was basically, if you guys have ever listened or read Devil in the White City.
Oh yeah, you've talked about that before.
I love that book.
Yeah, it's in the Architect's Library episode.
Yeah, it's a great book, and if you guys haven't read it, read it. They do mention something about Sullivan, basically how he would sell artwork and sell, he would basically sell his services, sell artwork and stuff just to kind of, get by. But, he was always a drunk, and he was always kind of, loud, abrasive, and abusive, and just, an angry little fellow.
Well, he did die of kidney disease and inflammation of the cardiac muscles.
Which basically means that he died of alcohol poisoning, or, of alcoholism, which, it kind of a crappy way to die. But I mean, here's a guy who, let's see, so let's kind of go down. He auctioned off his household goods and most of his architectural library. His wife of 10 years had left him. He sold their vacation home. I was the next part of unable to meet his club and organizational dues, which basically means he couldn't pay his AIA fees.
Is that what that means?
No, but I'm just, when I read that, I'm like, well, there's another one who can't pay his AIA fees. So he just, decides to forego that one. He didn't get his architectural record, in
Architect Magazine.
Yeah, Architect Magazine for free. He had to pay for it.
Yeah, well, he couldn't pay for
Couldn't afford that.
Couldn't even afford that.
Couldn't no longer pay his rent. His former staff of 50 reduced to 1 or 2 draftsmen.
Then he had to
wow.
He gave up his office and moved into, smaller rooms on the south side of Chicago, and then eventually had no office at all. And was basically renting a desk, a writing desk at the Cliff Dwellers Club.
Oh, man.
And then he kind of resorted to basically, as you kind of read on in his biography, that he had to resort to handouts. I mean, he was even getting handouts. The thing that kind of from Dankmar Adler's son, he was getting handouts from his old business partner's son. I mean, that's how low that's how far down he fell. And
crazy.
He even made, I guess he finally made peace with Sullivan. with Wright, which, that was one that kind of pissed him off. when Wright left, when he found out that Wright was moonlighting, doing these houses in Oak Park, he was pissed off. He fired him, which,
jeez.
But, apparently they had a huge falling out, and which kind of almost helped Frank Lloyd Wright's career by being fired. Because, then, if you listen to the stories, that he used that as kind of a, fire me, will you? Well, I'll show you who's the better architect, and kind of pushed him and all that other stuff. But, ultimately he died in a cheap Southside hotel room, and he hadn't worked or done a single architectural job for 2 years prior to his death. And
jeez, sad trombone.
Wow, hell of a way to end the episode, guys.
Yeah.
On the somber note,
So have you guys had any near-death experiences with your projects?
We're recording, aren't we?
Well,
I'm doing good.
Near death.
Oh, near death. Near death.
You didn't miss the operative word there.
It's late.
I've worked
near
really,
death.
really late, before we all have.
It's shortening your life. Yeah.
And gone out to, job sites, and then on my way back, because I drive out there pretty far and all that other stuff, almost falling asleep on the Beltway, and,
It's like architecture school all over again.
Yeah. almost very similar to that. Architecture school almost killed me too, didn't we? I think pre-show we were talking
we covered
about,
that.
you know, almost losing limbs and things like that. You know, me cutting half of my thumb off.
Yeah. Normal occurrence at the
exactly.
school wood shop. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Actually, yeah. It was funny is that I worked at the wood shop, and the guy who actually like ran the wood
Students today are like, what shop?
what
Anyway.
CNC,
The 3D
CNC
that would be like the 3D printer shop nowadays.
Yeah. You know, that was so much fun to actually just get down and dirty and just make things. I mean, that was so much better, you know. And I don't know, my view. But this guy, you know, the guy who actually like the actual employee who ran it. I mean, I was just the, you know, student employee that just was using it to earn money from the school to pay his tuition.
And cut his thumb off.
Well, no, I didn't do it there. That was I was cutting a mat board, and this was just like a perfect storm of stupidity. So here I am, I'm cutting I've got my straight edge on the, on the mat board, and I'm cutting it. And a guy walks up behind me and he's like, "Hey, Cormac, what's going on?" And he like slaps my back.
No.
Right as I was on the downswing. And my hand slipped off the ruler and right in the path of the blade. And sliced right through it. And I like grab a hold of my hand and I tuck my thumb under my fingers. And this girl walks up and she goes, "Did you just cut your hand?" And I look down and I'm like, "No." You know, first impulse was no. And I look down at my hand and there's like blood dripping from my hand. And she goes, you got to go to the doctor now. You got to go to the doctor now. So I open my hand up and the half of my thumb is kind of like on the, you know, it's like, it's kind of like, it's hanging there. It didn't go all completely through. But it was pretty damn close to being completely off. And so how they reattached it was with the medical glue and in the little like strips.
Duct tape.
Sturdy strips.
Sturdy strips. I mean, they didn't stitch it. They glued it. I was just like, well, shit, I could have Zap-A-Gap that damn thing. Did you guys ever use Zap-A-Gap?
No.
Do you know what Zap-A-Gap is?
Tacky glue, yeah.
Okay. Because, you know, I've said Zap-A-Gap before and people are like, what? What the hell is Zap-A-Gap? Like, Zap-A-Gap. Super glue. Well, why did you just say super glue? It's not super glue. It's Zap-A-Gap with Zip Kicker. I could have done that.
For the same reason you use Kleenex. That's why. Same thing. So I was doing fabrication once, doing design build, and I was building a bridge in a steel shop, drilling holes through pretty thick channels with a 3/4 horsepower Milwaukee drill. And if anybody knows, when you're drilling through steel, you don't go fast, you go slow because you want that bit to bite, right? And it just grabbed and that thing spun over backwards and just folded all my fingers back over my hand and did a spiral fracture right up the bone in my hand.
Ouch.
And it was, I've never broken anything. I got up and I'm like squeezing my hand and, hey, that wasn't so bad. I had heard the crack, 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 right? And then I'm like, oh, it must not be broken. And then I'm like, oh man, I feel sick. I went into the bathroom and passed out. Oh man, I just obviously went right into shock. And then my partner, he's like, oh, grabbed me and threw me into his truck and took me to the hospital. So yeah, I get to say my hand was broken by architecture.
Wow.
Well, you know,
man, I got nothing to top that. I got nothing on that.
Everybody now just has mouse hands, right? They just sit at a cubicle all day and draw.
I got cramps.
Look, I'm getting a callus. Oh, no, that's not it.
All right. I have another perfect, not quite a perfect storm of stupidity, as Cormac said, but
it's a good episode title right there.
yeah, I've already titled this one. We'll have to save that for another one. Reason one, always wear a hard hat on a job site, because sometimes we were walking this house it was in framing, and I was standing on top of, when they bring in the sheetrock, they always pile it in a room, and, so it's 24 inches high or something like that. And I was standing on it. And so I go to step off of that through the doorway. Well, you don't realize when you're wearing a hard hat that kind of sticks out, and you're looking down as you're stepping down. But when you're 2 feet taller, those headers for the doors are a lot closer to your head than you think. I stepped down and my head bashed right into the header of a doorway. And fortunately, I was wearing the hard hat, kind of shook my head and said, "Oh, yeah, I guess that was a bad idea." But fortunately, I didn't hurt myself. No blood, no scars. And I don't think anybody even saw it. So it's kind of like the cat that runs into a sliding glass door. It's like, oh, what the hell was that? Oh, nobody saw that, right? Nobody saw that, right?
Yeah, you look around.
Exactly.
Before you do the walk of shame.
Exactly. That perfectly describes it. So that's probably about my closest near-death experience.
There's many times.
The death of the ego.
But think of it, though. If I had knocked myself out on the job site on a frame walk, I mean, come on. Yeah, you couldn't live that down. No, so, word to the wise, always wear that hard hat.
Yeah, always. Even though, for some reason, I have a hard time doing that. You know how many times I've smashed my head? Yes, always wear your hard hat. Oh, and also, you may think, well, I'm the architect. I don't need to wear my hard hat out there. OSHA still shut down the job. Not
personal experience.
Honestly, never have. But, they always...
Well, now they're on alert because they all listen.
Now they're on alert, and they're going to be there, and I'm always going to be wearing my helmet.
All right. Well, with that, I think we should wrap this one up, guys. If you have questions or comments, visit our website at archispeakpodcast.com. There you'll find links to our individual Twitter accounts and the Archispeak Podcast Facebook page, where you can join in on the conversation. We keep threatening that, but it hasn't happened yet. And speaking of that, if you have an inspiring tale to share of hitting your head on a header, or
share your stories
or
stories here.
Breaking your hand or cutting your thumb off, we want to hear it. So call the Archispeak Podcast number at 415-484-8496, and we'll share it on the next show.
Or if you guys have any interesting deaths of architects that we didn't mention.
Yeah, Cormac needs more for his presentation here.
Cormac needs some more because he's also thinking about, this could spiral into an interesting coffee table read.
Awesome.
Yeah, and the last 2 episodes have gotten a lot of great comments and back and forth on Twitter and on the website. So that's awesome. We really appreciate everybody who's joining in the conversation.
Yeah, the last one I think really hit a nerve with everybody, because I think it was the one time that we finally, that we just finally opened up and just kind of said exactly what was on our mind, and everybody just, kind of commiserated with him and just said, hey, this is, these are things that, we've done and we've felt. And I thought there were some great comments. There was a lot of good conversation about that last episode. And
yeah, you're going to have to fill everybody in on what eventually happened or happens with that, Neil. Generically.
Sure. Well, there's no update as of right now. Well, I can tell you what I did do, which was what I alluded to during the episode, which was I didn't write a new contract. I did allude to the prior contract being complete. I did write an addendum and sent it to him. and I haven't heard back.
Dun, dun, dun.
So we'll see. Tune in to episode 32, and I'll give you another update.
Maybe.
In 2 weeks. Yeah, or maybe. Yeah. I want to put in my 2 cents, too. I really appreciate all the comments the last couple of episodes. It's something we've been hoping to see happen more with the show, from when we started, to get that sort of feedback and conversation going, and to see it finally happening with some regularity and some passion has really been gratifying. So we really appreciate it, and please do keep sharing those comments with us, because it makes all of this a lot more fun.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of us, when we're listening to podcasts and stuff, we have this internal dialogue going on. And for the people that have made that external, it really is appreciated. Because not only are you expressing your viewpoint, but when you're joining in, I think a lot of other people think the same things, and it just leads to really great conversations. And something that architecture needs is people talking about architecture, so that we all make the whole profession stronger. So it's a cool thing. So I encourage everybody, if you're nodding along or if you're disagreeing, it doesn't matter. You can always add your comment and get feedback and see what other people are thinking too.
Absolutely.
And
well, with that, everyone. Go ahead. I was going to cut you off.
You're going to cut me off and say goodbye to everybody. But as a summary to today's show, remember, you can love architecture, just don't let it kill you.
That's one to grow on.
And with that, stay subscribed, and thanks for listening.
All right, good night.
Good night.
Good night.
It's like a Dr. Phil moment there at the end.
Exactly.
And you could take that to the bank.
I used to shy away from the stampede. I had hard grenade, hunkered down in my heart at all. To get good at the game, I had to grease up my riot gear, and that craving came when you crossed along, when you came along. Chip and dog dared me, turn the sprinklers on, barefoot in the driveway, baby. Platform dancing, public praising, been someone who proudly tumbled, diving face first, bad with chances, braving birthday soon. Oh baby girl, Jim Dog dare me, turn the sprinklers on, barefoot in the driveway, baby. I get naked when I wake up in my birthday suit, my little piece of creation. I wanna shake mom, I gave mom, I gave mom, I gave mom to say thank you. What would I have what I want to do? I'm the buzz of elation. I wanna shake, I got love for you, love for you, love for you, love for you. I got love for you. I got love for you. I got love for you. I used to shy away from the limelight. I tucked my face, uptight my sleeve and back to build a better base. I had to fly my war paint right. I'm a better place since you made me upright. Love is never fight. Triple dog dare me, turn the sprinklers on, barefoot in the driveway, baby. Platform dancing, public praising, found someone who proudly tumbled, diving face first, fat with chances, braving birthday soon. Oh baby girl, triple dog dare me, turn the sprinklers on, barefoot in the driveway, baby. I get naked when I look out in my birthday suit, my little piece of